Okay, so at this hour, both Canada and the U.S. are taking a step back from this all-out trade war. The U.S. president says he's delaying tariffs on most Canadian goods, some Canadian goods, all Canadian goods, who knows, until April 2nd. And Canada's finance minister issued this statement on social media that Canada will not proceed with the second wave of tariffs on $125 billion of U.S. products until April 2nd, while we continue to work for the removal of all tariffs. Well, the minister who sent that tweet, Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, joins me now. Minister, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me on the show.
How would you describe where things stand with what Donald Trump did today? Is it your understanding that the vast majority of the economy is now sheltered from this 25% tariff, or do some companies have some work to do?
Probably both, David. The president, I've had a number of conversations with Secretary Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, on the weekend, twice today, a few times yesterday. What they decided to do is to remove the application of their 25% tariffs on everything other than energy, which was at 10%, as you know, on goods that are compliant with the U.S., Canada, Mexico Free Trade Agreement. So it's a complicated document around the rules of origin in a manufacturing context. Bottom line, David, is that the vast majority of Canadian exports to the United States are or can quickly be USMCA compliant. So that will, we hope, take a lot of pressure off a number of sectors. But it's not the end of the road. And I said to Secretary Lutnick again today that, okay, in exchange, as you noted, we would not impose tariffs, 25% tariffs on the further $125 billion of U.S. imports into Canada. We would push that by 9 days to that April 2nd date. Hopefully we're lining up a conversation and a discussion with the Americans that's much more coherent in the sense it's not this week, it's this sector of the economy. Next week, it's steel and aluminum tariffs, for example. So my conversation with Secretary Lutnick today was, okay, Howard, this is an important first step. We haven't taken the $30 billion of tariffs that or the 25% on $30 billion of imports into Canada. We have not lifted that because we want to get to a position that we were in 2 weeks ago where there are no tariffs applied to the trade between Canada and the United States. It's a first step. It's an important step, but we're not at the end of the road, and we're going to continue to do what's necessary, David, to ensure that all of these tariffs are removed. I'm hopeful that next week we can get by the steel and aluminum conversation, but we're going to come up to the April 2nd deadline, which President Trump has set up as sort of a reciprocal global tariff decision.
Okay, there's a lot there I want to go through, but just help me reconcile this. You say most Canadian industries are compliant or can quickly be compliant with the USMCA, with CUSMA, so they get around these tariffs. The White House is saying 62% of the imports from Canada to the United States are not compliant with CUSMA. How do they get that number? Explain to me how we get there when we have continental free trade.
So again, we're working with U.S. officials to get precision on that. Some businesses, David, will decide not to do the paperwork to be certified as USMCA compliant and will instead go with a tariff rate that applies to the most favored nation status. This has evolved. These are practices in different sectors that have evolved. I was told by Finance Department officials that those businesses or sectors that may have decided to pay 2.5% tariff as a most favored nation status, or some tariffs were zero rated, can quickly do the paperwork necessary with U.S. Customs and Border Protection to get the certification to be USMCA compliant. So that number, we hope, will quickly rise to close to 100%. But that's precisely why, David, this effort isn't over. So the fact that we're working with the U.S., the Trade Department is working with U.S. trade officials now to understand exactly which lines of tariffs will apply, says that this is a situation that's untenable. That's why we did not release the $30 billion of tariff response that the Prime Minister announced Monday, and we've got to get to a much more coherent position where none of these tariffs apply.
Well, coherence would be a good thing, I think, Minister, right? I mean, look, a lot of the...
In everything, David, not just in trade discussions, in your...
I agree. I agree. I'm a very big fan of clear understanding and clear language, and it's clear the premiers agree that they need to keep putting pressure on the United States, right? Doug Ford is going to put a 25% charge on electricity going to Minnesota, New York, and Michigan. Wab Kinew and others are looking at their electricity contracts. All the alcohol is staying off the shelves, and that's a consignment thing, so that's a hit to the U.S. producers. I mean, what does it say? What do you hope you accomplish by keeping the $30 billion there and these extra non-tariff measures at the provincial level in terms of, are they feeling this pain, do you think, Minister? Because that's the key here.
Well, and you're right. We've said all along, David, that ultimately what will, we hope, convince President Trump and his administration to take all of these tariffs off is the damage that they are doing to their own economy. So they're the government that decided to do this. The pretext was around border security and a common fight against illicit fentanyl. The facts, I think, bear out a positive story there, but they decided to proceed this week. They've made a change again today. But you're right, I'm encouraged. I spoke to a number of premiers today. I exchanged text messages with Premier Smith, with Premier Moe, with Premier Ford. I spoke to my Premier, Susan Holt. I mean, there's a great deal of unity across the country, not just from first ministers or different orders of government, but more importantly from Canadians. The airport today in Moncton, David, people stopped me to say that they were really happy that the country was standing up in the face of this American attack on our economy. I think that motivates all governments, and I hope business people to stand firm. It's not going to be without some incoherence, to go back to that word, or without some economic cost. But the only way we're going to get to a position where all these tariffs are lifted is to continue to take a united and firm position. And I was very clear with Secretary Lutnick that that's what we're going to continue to do. But if there are these openings to ensure that some important parts of the Canadian economy can get some relief, then of course we're going to ensure that that's the case. But we're not going to stop this pressure. And the premiers, I heard your interview with Premier Kinew, these are perfect examples of what we'll continue to do, I think, as a country until we get to that position where there are no tariffs.
Look, I understand you want to mitigate where you can while seeking the more perfect and permanent solution to this, but I don't know if you were part of the call between the President and the Vice President and the Prime Minister where they talked about fentanyl. Things got quite heated, but the seizures are not the metric they're using, apparently. They want to focus on deaths. I mean, what is your sense of what you need to do in that, or is fentanyl just totally the pretext, and this is really about forcing manufacturing to go to the U.S. because we have the Treasury Secretary out there talking about big incentives for people to invest in factories and relocate there.
Yeah, and I had I think, an encouraging conversation on Monday with Secretary Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, around, for example, what can Canada, the United States, and Mexico do together to deal with certain Chinese products that can be dumped below cost into Canada or the United States or Mexico. It's a non-market economy that can have price distortion effects in Canada or in the United States or in Mexico. And what can we do as a common North American group to deal with threats like China? So there are some positive signs there. But you're right, David, this uncertainty has already had an impact on investment decisions that Canadian businesses are making, that investors would be making. That's why it's a corrosive sort of way to proceed in building a thriving economy in Canada or the United States. Ultimately, we're convinced that President Trump will see that, and the stock markets have shown that. I mean, pick whatever indicia you want. It hasn't been economically a very successful week. Problem is, if this continues, there are obviously costs on the Canadian economy as well. So that's why we'll continue to do with premiers and business leaders what's necessary to get us to a position where none of these tariffs are applying.
They speak openly from the White House podium and in other places about the desire to see the auto sector move to the United States. Do you think it is a real possibility that Canada could lose, if not all, a significant portion of its auto industry to America?
No, I don't think that's a possibility at all. I mean, one has to discount the political rhetoric that can come in an Oval Office news conference, or as you say, some spokesperson at a podium in the White House, from the economic reality that we have an integrated auto industry in Canada. Canada is a competitive, productive partner for the United States auto industry. The auto parts business is critical to the success of the U.S. industry. This industry has been integrated and grown together for decades. You can't unscramble the omelet one morning because you decide, you know what, you want to have a fried egg or a boiled egg. You made the omelet. You can't turn it into eggs over easy. It's not going to happen like that. And my conversations with Premiers Ford, Premier Legault, and others, they are very much concerned around this sort of pressure that the Americans are bringing on those key industries to the country. And we'll continue to work with them to ensure that that kind of rhetoric is exactly that rhetoric. It doesn't turn into reality.
This persistent cycle of chaos, though, as you say, it raises the anxiety level, uncertainty over investment. We've already seen job losses in the aluminum sector in Quebec, for example. We have been reassured by your government there will be supports for workers. The premiers were apparently told things like waiving the waiting period for EI, extending job sharing, looking at tax deferrals. We've not seen anything publicly and with detail, though, from your government on this. Do we just have to wait for that? Like, when are we going to get some clarity in terms of what workers can count on, what businesses can count on, because they need to start crunching some numbers in the face of all of this?
So I think very soon, David, and you've identified, I was on the call that the Prime Minister had with the premiers the day before yesterday. The days sort of meld together now. And you're right, as the finance minister, I can assist with the liquidity for businesses by using federal crown corporations, the Business Development Bank, Export Development Canada. I can defer certain tax installments that businesses would make to give them more working capital. My colleague, Stephen McKinnon, has the ability to, in employment insurance, for example, you identified job sharing, making it more easier for long tenured workers. All of these things are available, and I would think very quickly, i.e. in the next day or two, those details will come out. But the Prime Minister laid out for the premiers a series of supports, and that's just the beginning of what we'll do. Those are the immediate supports that we can put in place, hoping that this circumstance doesn't last for weeks and months. But if we're in a circumstance where we're still in this kind of uncertainty weeks from now, then the government will be prepared to take further steps.
Okay, weeks from now, all of this, just as a final point, Minister, this moves beyond your party's leadership race and presumably a transition to a new Prime Minister. Now, I know you're a longtime friend of Justin Trudeau's and a loyal minister to Justin Trudeau. The president is taking shots at him today on social media. Secretary Bissent called him a numbskull. You know, that is what it is. But there is going to be a reset of some sort at some point next week, right? With the change in the leadership of the party and then presumably the government. What's your sense of how that could affect these conversations with the United States and the ability to get some sort of a resolution before April 2nd that can maybe put this all to bed?
So I think the work will absolutely continue, David. You're right. We'll have a new Prime Minister designate on Sunday evening, and he or she will undertake a transition and be sworn into office in the days that follow. If you look at what the leadership candidates, all four of them have been saying in terms of taking a strong position against this unnecessary American attack on our economy, I'm very confident that the person who becomes Prime Minister at this time next week or whenever the transition happens will be in a position to work with the premiers and to maintain very much that pressure. He or she will decide how they want to organize the government, of course. But again, if you have 13 other First Ministers who are so united and so supportive of the Government of Canada working with them to resist this American pressure, I think we should be very confident that if we can get to a position by early April where this is behind us, that's exactly what will happen.
I just wonder, though, Minister, Donald Trump makes things very personal. And there's a long history between your government and him in the first administration and now. Is the bad blood, between, or the shared history between the President and the Prime Minister, Is that playing a role in all of this? Is this something that is making it harder, or maybe even making it easier because they know each other so well?
So again, I'm not a psychiatrist, David. I don't imagine what motivates people. My conversations are with Secretary Lutnick and Secretary Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, and frankly, they're very businesslike. They're cordial, constructive. I mean, these conversations, they're not. There's no personal animosity whatsoever. You're right. President Trump practices politics the way he does. We're going to remain focused on the work that Canadians want us to do to strengthen our economy. So the personal stuff we can just drive by and focus on the work that Canadians want us to be focused on.
Okay. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, thank you for being here. I think the next tariff crisis is Wednesday of next week, so hopefully you can come back and talk about it.
Well, good news is I'll be in Ottawa Sunday. Maybe I'll see you at the Liberal leadership announcement.
I think there's a pretty good chance of that, so we may want to talk to you that day as well. Thank you,
I look forward to it.
Minister. Good to see you.
Have a great evening. Thanks, David.
Thank you, sir.